Truthfully, I feel like the last 2 years, up until about 6 months ago, probably, I was playing out of position. To give a bit of context behind that, it was about 2015 where I went full-time on the company. So there was about 4 years where I was part-time building it up, but the audience got to a stage in 2015 where we were making enough income that I went full-time in it, and I took on my first employee at that point. And we slowly grew the team through to 2020. So the start of the pandemic, it was around February, March 2020. And there was only 5 of us on the team at the time. And I realized I've got no place to complain here, but our company was one of the ones that did well out of the whole situation because so many companies moved online. So many businesses wanted to suddenly start using podcasting to communicate with their employees, to reach new audiences because they weren't meeting anyone in person. So many people suddenly had time to make their podcast because they weren't driving to work or they were on furlough or anything like that. So we had a huge burst of customers through 2020 right to the end of the year. And we struggled. We struggled to handle it in terms of the influx and keeping the app running well. And thankfully we did, but it was hard. And we had to hire pretty fast. And I've got no formal training in management. I've got no formal training in running a company. I was happy doing it the way we were, growing organically and learning as we go. But that was a crash course through that year.
Yeah.
From March 2020 through to probably middle of 2021.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast, where we talk all things leadership and personal growth and transformation in business and whatever else happens to come up. And today is no exception. I've got a fabulous guest who is ready to take the field and share his leadership journey with us, along with some other interesting insights about the world of podcasting. His name is Colin Gray. Colin, are you ready for kickoff?
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
I am excited too. And just so you know, team, Colin is coming to us today from Scotland, which happens to be one of my favorite countries in the whole world. So I'm excited to talk to you today, Colin. And would you be so kind as to set the stage for us and tell us your story about when you got the call to leadership, how that has impacted your journey, and then I'll share a few things about you.
Yeah, sure. It's a very long and rambling story, but I'll cut it short as I can. I worked at a university in Edinburgh as a learning technologist, and I was asked to look into podcasting as a technology to teach lecturers. So I started teaching it, and I just really fell in love with the medium at the time. I just loved the personality, the intimacy, the kind of long, in-depth material that can inspire, motivate, all that kind of stuff. As your listeners, I'm sure, well aware because they're listening to you. So I started writing about it. And I suppose that's where it started, because I started teaching people how to podcast, how to create podcasts through our blog. And really that obviously struck a chord because a lot of people started reading. It became pretty much the number one resource on the web for how to podcast. And really that was what started the whole story to turn into the company we have today and the team of people that I have working for me today. So that was kind of the evolution of it, I suppose.
Yeah. So team, here's some things about Colin, just to set the stage a little bit deeper. He is a podcaster and he's an international speaker. He also has a PhD and he's the founder of the Podcast Host. And is it Alitu?
Alitu, yes.
Alitu, which is a podcast maker app. And I know he's going to go into some detail about that. What I find fascinating about your background, Colin, is you started out in astrophysics and then you realized, it says to your dismay, how much maths were involved. And, you know, I find it interesting. Everybody I've spoken to on this show has a unique story, right? Coming from some people went the traditional route and others zigzagged to your story. And, gosh, you have a PhD in astrophysics, and yet that isn't something that you're using.
Well, funnily enough, the PhD is not in astrophysics.
Oh, it isn't. Excuse me.
No, not at all. It's not clear at all in the bio or anything. But yeah, no, I did a degree in astrophysics, so that was kind of what I was interested in at school. I just loved the concept of space, and I was an astronomer and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought it'd be great to go and do that. But I kind of jokingly said there, but it's quite serious. Like, you don't get to. When you get into astrophysics, when you get into space, really not when you go into space, but when you get into learning about it, it just turns into formula and maths and theory, and there's nothing real and tangible there. Obviously, I liked looking at the stars, but it turned out I didn't really care how the stars worked. So that's why I jumped out of it. And in the end, I was just way more into technology, and I got into web design and development, and I ended up teaching that. And that's what transformed into that university job, which took me to podcasting. And it was through that university work, actually, I got my PhDs. My PhD's in education. So it's in online education in particular, how to teach people digitally. So yeah, that's where that went.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking us into more detail about your background, because again, as leaders in whatever we're doing, we bring to the table a host of skills, experiences, and sometimes discovering we don't like something is what really sets us on our path. And that sounds like what happened to you, especially with podcasting. And here you are, it's 2022. You've been in the podcasting space for 11 years, which is definitely, OG by podcasting standards, right? Tell us about what it's like to be a leader in the podcasting space, given what's happened with podcasts since 2011.
I mean, it's been amazing, to be honest. It's been a privilege because it did start so small. Back when I was doing it, 2008, 2009, when I really first started learning it, and then kind of went more public with it, 2010, 2011, like you said, 11 years ago, it was tiny. There was essentially nobody making a living out of it, for sure. Very little in the way of advertising and sponsorship and stuff like that. And so it's been so interesting watching that whole industry form to now be, massive. I suppose we're still niche by some standards, still way smaller than, other mediums like TV, movies, video games, that kind of stuff, but massive compared to where we came from. And being able to, have any kind of influence over that has been so good as well. Like being our blog, the podcasthost.com, our site, like being kind of one of the leaders in that space. And there's a funny balance there, isn't it? Like, it's been so great having that exposure and being able to help that many people. But on the other hand, there's a responsibility there too that I do feel sometimes, like directing people towards certain resources or certain tools, and having to balance that is tricky sometimes, but it's certainly been far more positive than negative, definitely.
That's fantastic. What has been the biggest surprise for you in working with the various people that have come to you and said, yeah, Colin, I want to start a podcast. I know nothing. Once you've done something as a teacher, you get to know the material, but your batch of students each time is fresh. And so you get to experience watching them discover what it is you're teaching, what it is you're leading them through. And I'm just curious, what has been one of the biggest surprises that you've witnessed in your clients when it comes to podcasting?
Yeah, one of the biggest surprises, I suppose, in the early days was the fact that actually we ended up, a lot of people, one of the biggest barriers in podcasting is often the tech side. So people thinking about audio engineering, people thinking about audio cleanup, people thinking about the equipment like microphones and mixers and all that kind of stuff. And so very early, our blog started around the equipment, teaching people a good mic to buy, a good mixer to buy, that kind of stuff. But the surprise to me actually was the fact that more often than not, the best approach was to simplify it, actually, in terms of telling them not to worry about that stuff. People would overcomplicate their setup. And I think this applies to any medium as well. Like, I think a lot of people start a YouTube channel or start a blog, and they try and find all the tools, and they try and have the best setup straight away. And they buy, the best camera, the best microphone, the best mixer, the best writing tools, all that kind of stuff. And they really just need to bring it back. They need to pull it back and keep it as simple as humanly possible, because it's not about the tools. It's not about the mic. It's not about the camera. It's about what you say. It's about the message that you deliver through that medium. So that's often, and that surprised me certainly in the early days, that my job ended up being to teach them not to worry about that gear or that tech, and to worry much more about the content, to think, right, just get a USB mic, plug it into your computer and forget about it. You never have to change that thing again. As long as it's a basic level of quality, you're fine. Now just start writing good content.
So what is good? You've seen it all, I'm sure. I mean, 11 years and more, actually, if you were starting in 2008, 2009, what do you wish you saw? What kind of content do you wish more people might consider creating? Because certainly there are certain niches that are extremely saturated, like oversaturated to the point of ad nauseum. And then there are some that are wide open because nobody goes there. Is for people listening who either might be curious about starting a podcast for themselves, or maybe have someone in their life who's brought it up to them, they're like, I don't know anything. What kind of content do you see missing in the space?
Yeah, sure. I would turn it around slightly in that I think you can talk about anything. You can literally talk about any subject you want, as specific as you like. And actually, if anything, that's what I'd love to see more of. It's the super specific, super fan based, super passion based content. Like if you're into not only I call it American football. You obviously just call it football. If you're into football, don't do a football show. Don't even do football in the state of Texas show. Do a show about a very particular team. Maybe not even a particular team. Do it about a player. Like literally do 3 or 4 seasons about this one player and their career or something like that. Just going super, super specific, because that's the kind of content that fans out there want. And that's where podcasting actually really shines, because you don't have to have a massive audience to make a success of a podcast. You can have a really successful podcast with only a few thousand people listening to it, depending on your aims for that show. And it fills a gap. It really strikes a chord with those very specific people that also love that player, that share your passion. So that's the stuff that's missing most in podcasting. But where I was going to go at the start there was actually, to me, you talk about anything. You can talk about anything. You can go super specific. You can go quite general. But the stuff that I think is missing more is actually content with real purpose and structure. And it kind of goes back to my teaching days. Like I think about planning out lessons. So whether you're teaching or whether you're not, I think thinking like a teacher is such a powerful thing when it comes to creating content, whether it's a podcast, a video, a blog, whatever it is, but particularly in podcasting. So I think something like that, structure, and I'm happy to go into more on that if you want to, but that's my, like I said, that's where my PhD is. So it's a little bit too detailed potentially, but if it helps, happy to.
Yeah, I think it's good to hear the nuts and bolts, because, Team PYP is made up of intelligent business owners, freelancers,
sure.
and, people that work at higher levels within corporations. And there are some universal skills that teaching, it can spill over into any, all kinds of roles. I have a master's in teaching, and I didn't get my PhD, but I understand the thought process that goes into lesson plans, to thematically creating content, which is one of the reasons why I shaped the Player Position podcast around American football, because it gives structure. And then within that, I have some latitude. Right. Yes, so go into a little detail, would you? Cool. That'd be great.
Yeah, I would love to. So the structure is the huge one to me. It's and you'll know this then with that background too. That's great. Having even just having a base structure in the first place can help people have this scaffold of expectation. They know what to expect every single episode, and it helps guide them through the material. So with yours, you have the first, second, and third sections where people know to expect it. And so they kind of process stuff more easily because there's a bit of familiarity, there's a bit of expectation there. It's often called scaffolding in education. And that also lends itself really well to things like repurposing. So if you have your 3 sections, you could actually cut that up into, if you're recording it in video too, you cut it up into 3 shorter sections and repurpose that to other places. So structure actually helps you a lot in terms of being able to repurpose that content and use it in other places. But if you dive into that structure, one of the simplest that I talk to people about when you think about thinking like a teacher is if you split a show up into 4 sections, it can be really effective. The first one would be the introduction. And this is going back to, again, there's the scaffolding concept whereby you give people an idea of what's coming. And it helps them process it better. It helps them take it in more easily. So the introduction, you have to give a full summary. You spend a minute actually just talking through what's going to be covered on this show. And so many people miss this. So many people just jump straight into the topic and they just start talking, they just start teaching, they just start entertaining, whatever it might be. But if you just take a minute to actually give a summary, start to finish, tell them exactly what's coming, but without the full detail, it makes such a difference. It teases people to keep them around longer, to actually make them listen to the whole show, and it helps them understand the whole thing much more effectively because of those expectations. Does that make sense in terms of the introduction? That's like the first of the 4 sections I would talk about.
Yes, 100%.
Cool. The second is the kind of standard one. That'd be the theory. So this is the one that most people include. So this is where you actually go into the detail, the theory of the thing you're teaching. And it's, this is the kind of meat of the subject. So you talk about how it works and everything behind it. But then that leads into, and thinking like a teacher, many times you want to give examples. You want to actually put it in context in the real world. And then often that works best as a case study. So you teach the theory first, and then section 3 is you actually say, right, so that's the theory. Here's how it worked for me in real life. And I'm sure all your listeners out there have heard that happen before. Like you teach how something works, but then you say, right, so this is how it worked for me. And you give a case study. Or it could be somebody else. It could be interviewing somebody and actually ask them, so how did this work for you in real life? And give some examples. And that's a really strong adult learning concept, whereby we take things in and we process them and we remember them so much easier if we can put it in a real life context, something that really happened. And then the final one, the 4th part is, and this is the part that I think is almost makes the most difference, that the fewest people actually do, is give some action. Yes. And you'll know this as well, again, really, like how action, give them homework, give them something to do. So I've taught you the theory. I've given you an example of how it works for somebody else. Now, here are 2 or 3 things, or even just one thing. Here are some steps you can take right now to go and use this. And make it quite short. You can make it something that will only take them 5 minutes to go and do, but that will make such a difference. That makes all the difference to how that person retains that knowledge and the feeling they get having learned it from you. Because if you give them something to do and they go and actually achieve this thing in 5 minutes, they get this rush of dopamine. They get this, this rush of success, and they thank you for it. You're to credit for this bit of success that they've had. So I think that structure can apply to 95% of podcasts out there, even entertainment ones you can apply it to, but certainly teaching shows. And it makes such a difference if you apply that to the planning of your show.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you for mapping that out, because again, no matter what a person is doing professionally or even in a personal life, that structure that you just shared is applicable. You could use that for parenting. Right. You could use that.
Indeed.
You could use that just in your primary relationship. Sometimes I can't tell you how many times over, in my life, the person I've been involved with will just we just start talking in the middle of our own narrative. And the person listening is like, whoa, wait a minute. You're bringing me into the middle of the show here. I don't even know where this is coming from. So it's really a beautiful and simple guide.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
Love for you to tell us a story about a time, Colin, when things didn't go according to plan, when you found yourself playing out of position, and maybe you metaphorically fumbled the ball, you threw that game-losing interception. What happened, and then how did you recover from the the blunder?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like, truthfully, the last 2 years, up until about 6 months ago, probably, I was playing out of position. To give a bit of context behind that, it was about 2015 where I went full-time on the company. So there was about 4 years where I was part-time building it up, but the audience got to a stage in 2015 where we were making enough income that I went full-time in it, and I took on my first employee at that point. And we slowly grew the team through to 2020. So the start of the pandemic, it was around February, March 2020. And there was only 5 of us on the team at the time. And I realized I've got no place to complain here, but our company was one of the ones that did well out of the whole situation, because so many companies moved online. So many businesses wanted to suddenly start using podcasting to communicate with their employees, to reach new audiences because they weren't meeting anyone in person. So many people suddenly had time to make their podcast because they weren't driving to work or they were on furlough or anything like that. So we had a huge burst of customers through 2020, right to the end of the year. And we struggled. We struggled to handle it in terms of the influx and keeping the app running well. And thankfully we did, but it was hard and we had to hire pretty fast. And I've got no formal training in management. I've got no formal training in running a company. I was happy doing it the way we were, growing organically and learning as we go. But that was a crash course through that year.
Yeah.
From March 2020 through to probably middle of 2021, learning how to grow a real remote team, learning how to manage 15 people, learning how to help them communicate with each other. And suddenly I wasn't able to be involved in everything.
Right.
So that was my kind of leadership crucible or something, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
Through that 18 months, learning how to manage all of that stuff. And I feel like I'm getting on top of it. Now, the last 6 months, I'm starting to feel really satisfied with where we've got to, but certainly that was a tough 18 months, I would say.
Definitely. Well, but wouldn't you say that learning through fire, that crucible of experience, is far more rewarding? You're on this side of it now. You can look back and say, wow, I'm glad I was forced to go through that, because had it just continued to be the way it had been, you were growing it organically and everything. But I think when we're tested as leaders that's where it's interesting. It's difficult. You lose. I know I can only speak from my own experience, but I know I lose confidence. I start doubting myself. I wonder, do I have what it takes to do this, to meet this next challenge? And and we do. Right. And it has to do with just stepping up and saying, well, I don't know everything, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did.
There was a lot of that.
I don't know what I'm doing. and
there's sorry, I was just going to say there's freedom in that as well, actually.
There is.
There was a couple of points during that whole 18-month period where I said that to one or two members of my team. I was like, they were asking me questions and I felt this pressure to know the answers. And at one point I would just say, do you know what? I have no idea. I've not done this before. What do you think? Mm-hmm. And as soon as I realized that, it's obvious now, obviously looking back, but as soon as I realized that that's why I brought them on, so that they could help make those decisions. It didn't always need to be me. It's like leadership 101, I suppose, but it took me that to learn that, I suppose, to be in that situation.
It's one of the hardest leadership lessons, I think. It really, really is, because you exemplify the classic situation of, oh, I'm interested in this subject. Oh, look, I've created this thing. Oh, look, it's starting to take off. Oh, look, I'm actually making, an income. I can do this full time. Now I have to run a business. And that's not what you got into, right? No. This is such a classic leadership story. And it is a very different role of leading a company as its CEO versus being the journeyman who's doing the work that the company provides.
Yeah.
And boy, I think just about every person I've interviewed on this show has had that moment of, oh boy, I'm not just doing the thing. Now I'm actually running a business. Yeah. And some people, they discover it's not for them. They're like, this is not what I signed up for. I want to be the journeyman. Like I want to be the tinkerer or the sound engineer or whatever it is. And then they need to hire the person that can run the company and then allow them to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that actually really strongly ties into something. One of my biggest learnings, one of the biggest struggles as well, is that I'm a creator. That's what I like doing. I love creating things. I love podcasting, writing, making videos, all that stuff. But at some point during 2020, my job completely moved away from that. I wasn't doing almost any of that. 3/4 of my time, I would say, was probably on recruitment, meetings, management, all that stuff. And it got me down. I felt I just wasn't feeling good at all about work, not enjoying it. And I'd always enjoyed my work. So it was a really unfamiliar thing to me and really hit me quite hard. So there's a few things I kind of figured out, I suppose, around how to manage that, which I'm happy to delve into if you want. But
give us one.
It took a while.
What's one key lesson you've learned about how to manage that transition? Because I know there are listeners who are either in that space right now or will be eventually. So what did you discover helped you? Yeah,
well, there was two sides to it, I think, actually, that are worth a quick thing on. One was I ended up moving away. I managed to get my creator fix, not out of writing blog posts or creating podcast episodes, my builder, my technician fix, whatever it is, out of building the company. And I started to see that as the game instead. It wasn't creating a blog post, but it was creating a product that I sell to employees. Because recruitment was tricky in the early days. Like everyone was trying to recruit fast online, all the companies that were doing okay through it. And it was hard to attract people. So suddenly I was actually creating material that marketed the company itself. Like I was creating culture and values documents, and I was creating, company policies. That sounds really dull, but it was quite fun stuff, because it was, how do you build a company that people really love working for and that I'm proud to run and that I want to work for as well. So that was kind of, I changed a lot of my creator stuff away to that. And that helped a lot. But the other side of it was actually just getting really, really strict about scheduling. I actually, I still protect. I use a spreadsheet to map out my days every single week. Monday morning, I sit down, I look at the monthly goals, I look at the weekly tasks from last week, I write a little journal of what went well, what didn't go well, what do I need to carry over to this week, what are the priorities for this week? And then I map out what I'm going to do day to day. And that I've found is the way to stay satisfied that I'm making progress and I'm contributing. Because at the end of the day of a bunch of meetings, you can think like, I didn't really do anything. But if you look back at your schedule, I have a couple of protected times through the week where I still get to contribute practically to a couple of projects, maybe 5 to 10 hours a week. But I can also look at all the meetings that I was in that helped me help somebody else create something too. So that spreadsheet actually helps me a lot, because it shows me where my time's going, and it helps me protect at least a little bit of time to keep doing those projects that I love.
Wonderful. Who couldn't learn from that? I mean, whether you use a spreadsheet or a calendar app or just a piece of paper on your desk, Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you brought up that you look at your goals and then you align your activities around the goals. So there is that alignment. It's not just to throw stuff at the wall and hope you get it done. There really is strategy around time blocking.
Yeah, indeed. The journal side of things, I know it's kind of, it's almost a cliche these days. You've got to do your journal, all that kind of stuff. But I do it as part of company planning. It's really a few specific questions that do that exact thing that you just said, which is forward motion every single week. Yep. Because when you reflect on the previous week, you think about what actually went well, what didn't go well, what new things cropped up, and then pass that into and write a little bit of writing about what the coming week should hold based on that. I find that helps me make sure that instead of, doing something last week, something this week, something next week, they're all in different directions. Instead, it's always one step in the same direction every single week, because I'm tying each week together with that journal, with that bit of writing, with just 20 minutes of thinking. I found that really transformational too, actually.
It is. Taking time to think deeply can make all the difference in the world. And I've been a journaler since I was 10. So
really?
Oh yeah. Writing has been a foundational part of my life for most of my life. And it has made all the difference. In fact, when I look back at things I've written, I'm always, not as much anymore because I understand how it works now. But I remember when I was younger, I'd read back, I'm like, wow, that happened. I wrote something that I wanted, the whole manifestation piece. It's powerful stuff. It's powerful stuff. And I think as leaders, we owe it not just to the people we're serving, but we owe it to ourselves to get clear on where am I at right now? Sometimes that's all you need is 5 or 10 minutes to gather your thoughts, get clear on what can I just let go of at this moment so I can focus on that forward progress. So very important.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's a great lead in, Colin, to the part of the show I call Touchdown. And so I'm going to put you in the red zone with less than 30 seconds left on the clock. You and your team are down by 4 points, which means it's now or never. Tell us a story about a time when you metaphorically helped get that ball into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown.
I think this has got to be the second half of last year, where we'd come out of that really chaotic, disorganized 18-month period where I was just learning fast. And I realized a part of that realization was that I got a lot better at it, I think. But part of the realization was that I needed more help from much more experienced people. And my solution for that was actually to go out and seek funding. And we went ahead and started to take on an investment round. And I managed to get that finished up in about 3 months from sort of first inquiry to actually get an investment. So we did take on some money and sold a part of the company. But truthfully, it wasn't about the money. It was about it was about bringing on a team of people who have done what we are looking to do before, who have some skin in the game, some investment in the company, obviously a bit of ownership, a bit of commitment to help me either being part of the board or just being advisors or mentors. And that actually worked out. So now we have 2 investment firms who work with us, one in the US, one in the UK, and their teams are just amazing. They've given so much help since then, and the resource that they offer. And so they're kind of an extended part of my team now. So that has made such a difference. And there's a bit of an accountability thing there as well, actually. And by that, I don't mean kind of traditional accountability by like making me work. Like I'm not the kind of person that needs told to work hard, but I am the kind of person that needs told what to work hard on occasion. As in, I can come up with a strategy, I can make the plan, but it's great to get some feedback on that second eye from somebody with a lot of experience. And then for that person to make sure I stick to the plan, because I have the tendency to go off in all sorts of directions and look at shiny objects. And I'm sure some listeners will find that familiar.
Oh, yes. When you're creative, that is a problem.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So that was a big positive outcome of taking on that funding too. The fact that I now have to write monthly reports, which I really enjoy doing actually, because it helps me think through what we've done, what we're going to do next, and reflect on things. And that's now a condition. It's a part of what I have to do, and it's a really positive thing. So yeah, that was probably the biggest win for us in the last little while.
That's a great story. And I'm curious, where do you see podcasting headed in the next 5 years? You're obviously have skin in the game but you have a unique position because, again, of the longevity of you being around podcasting. So when you look into your crystal ball, Colin, what's the future of podcasting? And what does that mean for all of us?
Do you know what? I think it's bigger even than podcasting. I think the headwinds at the moment, the change that everyone's seeing around moving more to remote work, hybrid work, I think a big part of that is that all of us, everyone, is going to have to learn how to be a creator. Everyone is going to have to learn how to make media, I think because there's going to be so much need for more online media over the next 5 years as more teams go online, as we realize that companies have to help their employees connect with each other, whether it's training materials recorded by a real person on the team so you hear their voice, or whether it's a company update from a manager or something like that, or whether it's, just some written material, actually some documentation, whatever it is you're creating. I think we're all going to have to learn how to make good content, and nobody's going to sit through that. Teams are going to become so ineffective if they have to try and sit through like an hour-long, really dull video training session or something like that. And the only way companies are going to thrive is if we have people inside these companies who never thought about being a creator, learn how to do it, learn how to tell stories, learn how to structure their content, learn how to give that homework and those actions and all that kind of stuff. And I think podcasting is a huge part of that, because I think podcasting is one of the best ways out there to help people to learn, to inspire them, to keep them updated, because it can be listened to in that otherwise wasted time, like on the bus or ironing or cooking your dinner or anything like that. So I think it's going to be great seeing all these people who never would have made a podcast, never would have done a YouTube channel. Suddenly they're going to become creators, and some of them are going to get really good at it.
I love it. And my brain is going a million miles an hour as I'm thinking about what you're saying. That's fabulous. And, team, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not going to make a podcast, it's not about you making a podcast per se. It's more about how podcasting fits into the world of work and personal development and just being a human on the planet at a very interesting time in our history as we're coming out of a pandemic, but we're also looking at some pretty intense, things going on in parts of the world that are, quite frankly, very difficult to see. And we just don't know. And so that coming together through voice, through storytelling, through carefully curated or crafted content can make all the difference in just being able to get up in the morning and say, I can do this, right? I can keep going. Yeah. I can keep going. And that's one of the reasons why I show up to the mic every single week, is I just know that the feedback I've received from my faithful listeners is that your story, Colin, along with all the others, gives them that burst of inspiration, of hope, of, hey, I can see my life a slightly different way because I listened to the Player Position podcast and heard someone's leadership story. You told it so beautifully and honestly, which I appreciate very much. And for people who'd like to know more about you and what you do, your services and your awesome stuff, where do you hang out online?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to answer any questions or have a chat on Twitter. That's probably my most easy way to reach. So you can find me at Colin MC Gray, Colin McGray on Twitter. But I mean, if anyone wants to start a podcast, that's what we do. So yeah, happy to help with that. The easiest place to start really is using that word start. So it's thepodcasthost.com/start, thepodcasthost.com/start. And that's our big how to start a podcast guide. That takes you through everything that you need to do to actually run a good show.
Fabulous. So team, the links to connect with Colin will be on his show notes page over at pyppodcast.com. Very easy to get into his world and interact with him. You heard him here, how affable and friendly and just really cool he is. So, if podcasting is something you've been thinking about, check out what he's got going on. It's awesome. And as we wrap things up here today, Colin, would you be willing to share with us a book or a couple of books that have made a difference on your leadership journey? Ones that you either turn to regularly or maybe it's a recent find?
Yeah, sure. This is a relatively recent one, actually, last year or so, because I've been so into kind of processes and building the company as a process itself. It's Traction by Gino Wickman. And it's teaching an operating system for your company, the entrepreneurial operating system, they call it. And I've gotten so much from that, actually, in terms of how to run great meetings, how to set good goals, how to manage the kind of planning cadence for your company. So it sounds dull, obviously, but it's actually a really good read. And they have written, really interestingly, they wrote a book that went along with it, which is actually a novel. It's a fiction book, but based around the story of a company that was struggling and used this system to improve what they do. So it's entirely selling their system, obviously, but it's actually a really good read because there's so much in there that you're like, Oh, that's so familiar. I know that person. Like, there's a person in the meeting that's causing trouble through this and that reason. And you're like, oh, I know that person. Oh, we need that.
And what's the name of that book?
It's interesting. That one is called Get a Grip. And that's by Gino Wickman too.
Okay. Well, I'll put links to those books on your show notes page as well for, listeners who might be interested in checking them out. Always nice to add new books to our libraries as leaders.
Excellent.
So, oh my gosh. Well, Colin, you've been great today. Thank you for showing up and giving us some really great things to think about in terms of starting a podcast, being in the podcasting space, leading, making the transition from I love this certain thing, and now, I'm running a company around this this certain thing. that was fantastic. Yeah.
Indeed. No, happy to share. Thanks for having me on. It's been great. And happy to help with any questions people have. So by all means, give me a shout on Twitter. Happy to help anytime.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.